He paid for quiet, for dignity, for a seat where turbulence was supposed to be measured in bumps, not in looks. The linen napkins and crystal glasses said first class, but the eyes that slid past him spelled something else. The cart rolled by. Plates lowered. Smiles given. His tray stayed empty. It wasn't about hunger. It was about being told he did not belong again. At 30,000 feet, he swallowed the heat in his chest and took mental notes. By landing, he would decide. The question wasn't whether he could let it go. It was whether anyone should. Marcus Hale built his life on patience sharpened into power. The son of a nurse and a delivery driver, he learned early that calm could be armor and preparation could be a weapon. Years later, through strategy and stubbornness, he became the CEO of a global logistics firm that moved the world's products with quiet precision. His calendar was a mosaic of boardrooms and tarmacs. His suitcase always half-packed. His routines trimmed to the essentials that kept him grounded. On a late evening flight, a coast-to-coast run before a morning keynote, he chose first class for what it promised. A boundary from the noise, a meal to keep the mind clear, and a few hours of sleep to sharpen the next day's edge. He settled in with a book he'd been trying to finish for months, the hum of the cabin engine threading into a calm he trusted. The aisle filled with the choreography he knew well. Coats collected, glasses filled with an easy clink, the scent of vanilla and citrus drifting from hot towels. Across the aisle, a couple laughed softly. 2 rows back, a frequent flyer scrolled through a spreadsheet glowing cold blue. The crew moved with trained smiles and practiced pace. It all felt familiar, almost soothing. But familiarity carries memory. He carried it too, of being followed in stores, of keys clenched on sidewalks, of expectations lowered and then denied. He didn't come looking for a battle. He came to work, to rest, to move on. Tonight, the sky would decide otherwise. Before we continue, a small favor. We're on a mission to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support makes it possible. If this story resonates, please subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. And don't miss the final part. Now back to the story. The meal service began with a warm glow, a cart polished to a mirror shine, plates stacked in quiet promise. To his left, a passenger received the first course with an easy thank you. Ahead, another chose the vegetarian option and a second pour of wine. The crew's rhythm was smooth, an orchestra of trays and napkins and small kindnesses that, when offered equally, feel like air. When the cart reached his row, the rhythm changed. The lead flight attendant's gaze flicked over him, then past him. The cart rolled on. His tray table remained a blank stage. The next passenger received a plate, a smile, a gentle nod. The cart continued. A second pass for beverages. A second pass for bread. His space was a pause no one acknowledged. He pressed the call light once. The glow above him felt like a question mark in the dark. The attendant arrived, eyes cool, posture tilted away. In a low voice, framed by the hush of the cabin, he was informed that his meal had run out, and that policy limited the alternatives to little more than a snack. 2 rows back, he noted the faint clink of silverware on a plate that matched the entree he had pre-selected days ago. The contradiction wasn't subtle. It was sharp and deliberate. He asked calmly for clarity. The answer stretched long and thin, a string of justifications that never touched reality. Another attendant drifted by, a shadow of support at the shoulder of the first. The message settled like frost. Take less, accept less, be less. He thought about raising his voice, about forcing a scene that would live in shaky phone footage and comment sections. He thought about the way outrage can swallow a person whole and leave only a caricature behind. He reached for something else instead. He reached for the habits that made him who he was. He opened the Notes app on his phone and began a quiet ledger. Timestamps, names found on small metal badges, seat numbers where contradictory plates were served, descriptions precise enough to hold up against scrutiny. He captured the moment without letting it capture him. A passenger across the aisle glanced over, sympathetic and uncertain. The looks came in small doses, curiosity, discomfort, a recognition that this wasn't about preference. It was about place. The flight stretched on. The cart returned to collect what he never received. His stomach tightened, not from hunger alone but from the ache of being rendered invisible in a space he had paid for, in a space he had earned many times over. He closed his eyes and steadied his breath. He reminded himself that power doesn't always live in volume. Sometimes it lives in restraint. With the plane steady over the Midwest, he connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi and sent a message to his chief of staff, attaching the notes and the details. His company's annual travel spend with this airline wasn't a footnote. It was a headline, an 8-figure partnership that stretched across continents and contracts. There were agreements and service commitments signed with confidence. There were promises of training and accountability etched in ink. He composed a second message to a contact he rarely used, a senior operations executive at the airline who had stood beside him on a stage 2 quarters ago, boasting of a future built on trust and equity. He didn't write with anger. He wrote with clarity. He framed the moment with facts and the weight of a relationship that had been carefully built. The cabin lights dimmed for the crossing. A few passengers slept with mouths open and blankets tucked. He sat awake, the quiet thrum in his chest syncing with the engines. He wasn't interested in vengeance. He was interested in consequence, the kind that changes behavior, the kind that prevents the next passenger from being asked to swallow humiliation along with disappointment. Clouds gave way to city grids etched in amber. The captain announced descent in the measured baritone of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Seat backs clicked upright. Windows framed a runway like a lit path home. He pressed send on his messages. The wheels met the ground with a soft thunder. The plane raced, slowed, and turned. And somewhere between that touch and the gate, phones vibrated in offices still lit after hours. Duty managers stood. A base director checked a policy manual he already knew by heart. The story had left the cabin. It was now in rooms where decisions could end patterns or excuse them. At the gate, the usual choreography faltered. The front door remained closed for a beat too long. The crew huddled by the galley, glances darting as 2 uniformed supervisors stepped aboard with clipped professionalism. No one raised a voice. No one needed to. Process took the stage. Passenger services came forward with a practiced apology poised on the edge of habit. He did not step into their script. He stood without haste, took his bag, and moved only when the aisle opened. He felt the eyes of the crew brush over him, and he felt the long weight of every moment like this, his and others, settle into his spine like steel. Beyond the jet bridge, a quiet corner of the terminal held a conversation that wasn't a conversation. It was a directive tethered to a contract and a record of training signed by every crew member on board. The evidence was simple. A pre-selected first-class meal denied without cause, language that contradicted service records, a pattern captured by timestamp notes and corroborated by passengers and galley counts. In a world where excuses often outpace action, the facts moved faster. His call to the airline's senior operations executive had not been emotional. It had been structural. It referenced service-level agreements, supplier diversity commitments, and the clause that required immediate corrective action in instances of discriminatory conduct. It reminded the airline that a partnership is more than logos on a slide. It's lived experience at 30,000 feet. Within the hour, the crew was relieved of duty. Within 2, the base director concluded an expedited review using the very policies designed to prevent this. The verdict did not hinge on a headline. It hinged on documented behavior and a zero-tolerance standard the airline had publicly championed. By sunrise, access badges were deactivated, schedules cleared, and termination notices issued. He did not watch them hand over lanyards. He did not linger to savor discomfort. This wasn't triumph. It was a boundary drawn where one had been crossed. In the space where humiliation had tried to make a home, accountability stood instead. The cabin that had denied him a basic service had also exposed a deeper truth, and the ground had returned it with consequences no one on that crew would forget. He left the terminal into a morning that smelled like jet fuel and coffee, the sky a thin gray that promised light. The city began to stir around him. Commuters, taxis, the sleepless and the early. He moved through it with a quiet that wasn't emptiness but intention. The sting of the night hadn't vanished. It rarely does. Moments like that lodge themselves under the skin and remind you how fragile dignity can feel when placed in the hands of others. At his office, the team gathered around the facts with the same precision they brought to shipping lanes and supply chains. There were follow-up calls, not to demand vengeance but to demand systems that could not ignore a passenger because of who he was. There were commitments drafted in language that would outlast any one person's apology. Additional training verified by third parties, a reporting pipeline that reached beyond the terminal, inspections that didn't wait for a trending video. He wrote a memo to his company that did something harder than celebrating a win. It named the loss in full. It reminded his people that what hurt wasn't a missed entree. It was a pattern that says access can be purchased but respect cannot, unless institutions force the difference to matter. He shared just enough of the night to help others recognize the moments in their own worlds when silence has felt safer than exposure, when calm was mistaken for consent. Then he did what leaders are supposed to do when a door opens to change. He widened it. He directed a portion of the company's vendor budget to fund measurable anti-bias programs for all partners. He established a travel ombuds program to ensure that every employee, from intern to executive, had a voice with leverage when treated unfairly on the road. He agreed to sit down with the airline's training designers, not to be appeased, but to ensure that the next crew would know the difference between policy and prejudice. He also did something small and personal. He found a quiet hour at home, at his kitchen table, and ate a meal he made himself. He let the simple act rewrite the relationship between hunger and humiliation. He let it remind him that power isn't just a phone call or a contract. It's the insistence on seeing yourself fully, even when others try to edit you down. This is not the story of a meal. It is the story of a mirror held up at altitude and a decision to refuse a distorted reflection. It's the story of what happens when patience chooses a harder path than rage and turns that choice into consequence that counts. Many will say the outcome was too harsh. Many will say it still wasn't enough. But the point isn't comfort. The point is change. How many flights, offices, and rooms still hold this same script, waiting for someone to interrupt it? How many more times will dignity be a negotiation? And when the next person is told, in subtle ways, to accept less, will we build a world where they don't have to choose between swallowing it and starting a war? Or will we finally make respect standard at every seat?